happy to announce Megan. She was my ex-counselor in Centerstone. She's the one that got me to go to Terre Haute, I think, I forget now, Fort Wayne, and go to, you're better than I am. Come on up here, Megan. Y'all know I got anxiety, right?
All right, I'm gonna take this off. Okay. It's always a honor and like a humbling experience every time you get to come up and share what God has done in your life. And you never know exactly where to start because there's so many spots in my life where I can just see God had his hand in it. You always want to go back to childhood. But I'm going to kind of change it up a little bit because it was just last June that I found myself in one of the darkest times in my life, and I consider that being my rock bottom point, where I just completely surrendered, and I didn't know what else to do. I was very broken, very depressed, very empty, and that was when my recovery process really started to begin. I had found myself in a relationship with someone who struggled with a heroin addiction. Addiction was not new in my life, but for some reason this relationship took me down a lifestyle of addiction that I just wasn't quite prepared for, and it just wrapped me in like a tornado, and I couldn't get myself out, and it just spit me out, and just everything was left in ruins at that point after 3 years. When I finally got enough strength to move away from that relationship, my entire life just kind of came bleeding out. I had realized that I never did a real healing process, and I just kept moving on and moving forward and kept covering up the Band-Aids, and I never really allowed wounds to heal. So when that relationship was over, it just like it ripped the Band-Aid, and for the first time in my life, I really had to deal with myself and the issues that my life has caused me. I was always the one that was helping people in recovery. I was always the one that I was very, I guess, codependent and enabling. I was making sure my family was okay and everyone else around me was okay, and I just neglected myself for 28 years. So that brought me back to dealing with childhood trauma. I grew up in addiction. Both of my parents were active addiction. My mother got to the point when I was 10 years old where she was very dysfunctional. She couldn't take care of me and my 3 younger brothers anymore, and she bailed on us and left me and my brothers to my father, who was at that time was what you would consider a functioning addict. He was able to work and raise us kids, but he had to maintain his addiction just to be able to do that. So that started a lot of those abandonment issues and neglect. I had to grow up really fast and help my dad raise my younger brothers. So therefore my childhood was done and over with at a very young age. My father ended up moving in and getting married to a woman who was addicted to pills, which took his alcoholism to another type of addiction. And we just kind of lost my father to that relationship and to the pills. So therefore, I started exploring outside of the home. I escaped my home life as much as I possibly could, whether that was through boyfriends, going out and finding parties. At that time, I still was a pretty good student. I got involved in extracurricular activities, but my motive was I just don't want to go home after school. So I just involved myself in anything and everything. I was very diligent with my schoolwork during the day and working a part-time job just to party by night. I had like this dual life. I was responsible, but yet I was destructive at the same time. And that dual characteristic played itself out the rest of my adult life until a year ago. So finally, when I was 14, 15, my partying got a little bit out of hand. I got into a relationship who was my high school sweetheart, and he had a pill addiction. But again, addiction was normal to me. That's what everyone did. It wasn't a red flag. And I fell head over heels in love with this man or this boy. And I stayed in that relationship for 3 years. Codependency thickened even more, enabling thickened even more. To my senior year, I was about to graduate, and I knew I wanted to do something with my life. So I left that relationship and tried to focus on going to school and, again, being a responsible teenager, yet the partying life just kind of took control at that point. That summer, I just got involved with, I just stopped doing anything responsible. That whole summer was nothing but partying to me. I ran away from any type of responsibilities. I isolated myself from my family, and my whole life at that point was party from sun up to sundown. And it became very unhealthy, and I lost myself that year. Within 3 months of that relationship ending and my partying lifestyle spiraling out of control, I get a phone call that my high school sweetheart had died from an overdose. At 18, you don't really expect to get hit by the real world that quickly. I was not equipped to handling that type of reality. That took addiction to a whole different level to me. I didn't realize addiction could just take someone's life so suddenly. Everyone else in my life they were addicts, but yet they were still functioning. So that hit a different spot and caused even deeper wounds. So my only way of escaping that, drinking and smoking weed, was not enough for me anymore. I started using pills myself. That was enough to numb out every little bit of pain that I did not want to feel. Losing him was just too much, and pills was the only way I could escape from it. And in a weird sense, it was almost like it brought me closer to him. And I did that for about a year. I became very depressed, again, isolated myself not only from family, but now isolated myself from friends. The ones that I was partying with, my pill addiction was too much for them, so I just became very lonely, and pills was all I had. That's what kept me going for that year. That was better than the grief. So about a year, I did that, and I just noticed that my mentality, my way of thinking was getting sicker and sicker and sicker. I was doing things that just did not make sense to me. Trying to have baby because I thought a child would save me from that world that I found myself in, where my whole life I didn't want to be that person because that's what my parents were. And I always told myself I was never going to be like my mother. And I found myself becoming more and more like my mother, and that scared me. Pills were not hard drugs to me at that time. It was back in 2008. It was still where it was very recreational. You didn't think of pills like it was crack cocaine because that's what my mom did, so I justified it saying it was okay because it wasn't like my mom doing a hard drug. So I always had like some type of boundary there, but I was always playing with fire. I had a bit of a spiritual awakening one night, and in the middle of, it was 3 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of an act that I could have possibly ruined the rest of my life, I heard a loud noise. At the time, I'm thinking it's my ex, my way of thinking at the time was sick. I just heard this loud noise saying, "What are you doing?" And it stopped me in my tracks from doing what I was doing. And I pulled myself out of that situation, and I ran home, and I cried out, and I prayed for the first time since I was a child. The next morning, I called my grandmother, who was the only Christian person I knew, and I told her, "I need to come live with you. I need to do something. I can't live like this anymore." So I did. So at that time, I was 19 years old. I hadn't worked in a year, haven't done anything with myself in a year. And she started getting me a job, helping me get on my feet again. But I got rid of the pills out of my life, but I was still hanging on to the bad, toxic relationships. I was still hanging on to alcohol, still hanging on to marijuana. I never let go of everything. I just let go of the thing that was obvious bad for me. The rest I still justify. So I started getting back into school, going to work, getting back on my feet, getting my thinking back. And then I settled down and found a man who was 10 years older than me, who was a father. He was a single father, so that whole savior mentality that I had, I was going to come in and rescue him and his children and become a mom, and it started to fill those voids again. I thought I was doing the right thing, but really I was just covering up the damage. I was just filling those empty holes. And I stayed in that marriage for 5 years, had 2 children, and ended up getting back on my feet, going to school, wanting to become an addiction counselor. At that point in time, my mom was in recovery. She had a year clean. My dad was finally getting in recovery. It started sparking that passion for recovery. I started to see people transforming their lives, and it became contagious, and I knew I wanted to be a part of it. But yet I still had this dual life going on. I was still married to a man who was an alcoholic, who was abusive, and it was always verbally and mentally abusive, and eventually it became to be physically abusive, to where she was 3 years old and she witnessed it, and the look in her eyes was the same look I used to give to my mother, and that was enough for me to leave that marriage, because I never wanted my children to be, one, scared of their father, and two, I always knew that I was their role model. And if I was allowing a man to be on me, then what example was that giving to them? So I got out of that marriage. Again, cycles of family, broken homes, marriage ending with violence and abuse and alcohol. I immediately got into another relationship right after that. I still was pursuing a career, was still doing the right, responsible thing as a mother, got my own job, I was growing in my career, I was doing the right things, yet I'm in another relationship with now a heroin addict. I just didn't know how to quite break addiction out of my life for once and for good. For some reason, I was clinging to it, like I was addicted to wanting to help and be a part of it. It gave me purpose in some sense, but it was killing me. And you don't realize things at the time what you're doing. You're not thinking that way. It's just hindsight's 20/20. So in those 3 years, I continued to get better in my career. I'm living a dual life as a recovery coach, going home, dealing with someone who's suffering with heroin, which was a whole different addiction I never experienced before. That was a new experience of drugs for me. And I was just really living this dual life, helping people by day and coming home to a destructive home by night. And I did that for about 3 years until I started developing those old habits, started coming back in my own life, and I found myself drinking on weekends. I found myself smoking weed every day. And I justified it that it was helping him get away from heroin. So as long as he wasn't doing heroin and heroin wasn't in my home, it's okay. We were doing the whole medical marijuana treatment. But yet, I knew that I was better than that. I knew that was not the life I wanted to lead for my children, and I didn't want to just be home smoking weed every night and be pretending to be this different person by day. So I eventually left my position as a recovery coach. Really wanted to focus on me for the first time in my life and pursue things that I felt were healthy for me. And that's when God came back into my life. I had left my relationship with God back in 2016 after my dad celebrated 18 months of sobriety. And I thought life was going good again. My family was back together. They were all sober. It was an answered prayer of mine since I was a child. Just to come from work one day, driving on the interstate, come across this accident and realizing that it was my father's motorcycle on the side of the road. And they had found heroin in his pocket. To me, that was the ultimate, the worst thing God could have done to me. To me, it was something I prayed for my dad. He was my best friend. He was the one who raised and never abandoned me. Even in addiction, my dad was always there. He never made me feel like he didn't love me or neglected me. So when I prayed so hard for my dad's sobriety and he finally got it, just to lose it to a relapse and be gone, I wanted to blame God. And I did blame God. I didn't want nothing to do with God after that. Because if God was going to be this God that gives and takes away, I don't want nothing to do with the God that does that. So at that point, my relationship that was my focus. and my job and my career was my focus. But when God came back into my life back in 2018 in February, I had an opportunity to cover a story because I write on the side. Residents Encounter Christ. I don't know if any of you guys have heard about that program. Yes. I got to go into the jail in Jefferson County, because that's where I was living at the time, in Madison, and I got to cover the story. And again, I got to see God transforming in people's lives, and I got to touch a recovery again. And it got that spark going, and I wanted more of it. So the church that was down there at the time, they were very involved in the recovery community, and I wanted to be part of it. So I immediately got involved in that church, and it started, the changing again. And I knew within a few months of that, I knew that God was calling me to be a disciple. I knew he had a mission for me, but it was going to require me to leave things behind. And the verse that came to me at the time was, "Take no back for you for the journey." And I knew that was to leave every emotional baggage that I had, and I had to drop it right then and surrender it all if I was going to go and be his hands and feet. And so I did that. I knew that relationship was the hardest decision I ever had to make. And that was the first heaviest baggage I had to first drop. Then I had to deal with the rest of my life. I didn't realize I had carried so much luggage behind me all those years. I thought I was good, and I didn't really know how to handle a recovery process in the beginning. I knew how to teach it. I was a really good teacher, because I really cared for people. I cared about them, so I was really good at giving advice and wisdom and guidance and really showing them love. But I didn't really know how to show myself love in the way that I deserved it. So teaching myself recovery was a different process. And I didn't do very good in the beginning. I still struggled with going out and drinking, trying to find old friends from high school, because now I didn't have a social life because my boyfriend was my only social life. And I just didn't know quite how to do it. And I did that for about 3, 4, 5 months. Just really struggled with myself. But I knew if I was really going to heal, deep healing, I was going to have to get involved in a full recovery process the same way anybody else needed to. See, I wasn't fully recovering from drugs and alcohol. I was recovering from life of addiction. I was recovering from toxic relationships. I was recovering from trauma. I was recovering from a lot of things. And for so long, I thought recovery was just for people recovering from drugs and alcohol, when I realized recovery is for anybody. Like, we all have something to recover from, and I had a whole life of things to recover from. And I was going to have to embark on a full recovery lifestyle. So I got myself into the Walk to Emmaus back in October. If you haven't been to the Walk to Emmaus, find out what it is and please go. It will change your life. When I went to this 3-day retreat back in October, and that's all I'm going to say about it, I knew that I was supposed to leave my old life behind, but I had no idea what I was supposed to do after that. Okay, I let go of these relationships, I let go of these toxic behaviors, but now what? Now what do I do with my life? It was just completely blank to me. I didn't, for once in my life, I didn't have my own plans. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life anymore. And by the end of that retreat, and at that point, I was still trying to hold on, like, God, please restore this relationship. God, please do it this way. Please do it that way. I was still holding on my own will. But by the end of the 3-day retreat, I knew that God was saying, no, in order to make room for the new, you have to let the old die. That was a hard thing to hear. That's not what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear some verses about restoring relationships, restoring things that you have to lose. I wasn't quite ready to lose again, because I've lost so many things before. What do you mean I have to let go of another thing, another person? I didn't like that answer, but I knew it was the right thing to do, so I did it. My first day back from the Walk to Emmaus, during that weekend, I met a lady there who told me about this group called Recover Out Loud. I had tried going to recovery groups before, but it's like I never quite felt like I was either on one side or the other. I never felt my fit with any group that I've ever tried before for myself. So that was part of my struggle with my recovery process. I didn't have the right fellowship. I didn't have the right guidance. I didn't have the right people showing me the way. So I said, okay, I'll give it a try, because I knew if I was going to come back. At that point, I was still struggling with smoking weed, and I didn't want to come back and start doing that again. So I was going to give this new thing a try. So I went to my first real meeting for me. And I go there, and they're immediately interested in my life story. They wanted to hear all about what I've been through, what my goals were, not about my family, not about what they've done. They were interested in me. And that was new for me. And I immediately started feeling like I was healing from that very first interaction, because for once I was talking about my life story. And there's so much healing when you talk. And I ran with it from that point on. I took on the full recovery lifestyle. I stopped drinking. I stopped smoking weed. I dropped every toxic relationship, even the ones with my own immediate family. And I just removed every negative thing and anchor that was holding me back. And I started doing that self-inventory, really looking at myself and realizing the things that I needed to heal from, things that I needed to work on. And there was a lot. There was a lot there. I didn't realize, but I didn't give up on myself this time. And no matter what, I was going to fight for myself. Funny enough, I've received more criticism now since I've chosen myself and started doing the right thing in my entire life, which is ironic to me. But it's because I stopped enabling people, and I started choosing me. And people don't like that when you do that, because you block off access to their needs at that point. But it's been almost a year since I've been in this recovery process, and it's one thing when you're teaching recovery, which is another thing why I got involved with Recover Out Loud. A lot of people in the organization, outpatient programs and stuff, they teach recovery, but they never truly walk the recovery process themselves. They don't truly understand. And I was one of those people. And I feel like now I can actually lead by an example and be a true beacon of hope. I can spread real light, because now I'm really living it now. I'm a walking example. I'm not just talking the talk, but I'm walking the walk. And your actions mean more than anything you can say. You can say all the right words, you can have all the right intentions, but if you're not living right and you're not going home and doing the same thing that you're teaching during the day, it means nothing. So I've been blessed more now, knowing that now I actually have something real to offer people that is authentic, and it has real value now. So I was blessed when Ron reached out and asked me to come share my testimony, because you never know the seeds that you plant out there in the world. Even if you're doing wrong, you don't know what happens after you plant that seed. It gets watered on, it grows, and it reaps its harvest, and it comes back to you as a blessing. And doing things like this, it keeps giving me more momentum to keep going, and to not give up on myself, because if I don't give up on myself, then I'm just telling people and giving people more permission to not give up on them. So I brought my daughter here with me today, because my story, more than anything, the reason why it's so important to me, because I'm going after the life that was stolen from me from my childhood, going after opportunities that I never got to experience, family vacations, sports. All those opportunities were stolen from me, and so I'm doing it now. And now I get to offer those opportunities to my children, break those cycles of addiction, and be completely open and honest with them about what I'm doing. And if I'm not home and I'm gone all the time, because, when you're in the field of ministry and you're a disciple, it is a busy, busy world. And sometimes I struggle with mom guilt, because I'm not home with them all the time like I used to be. But they know what I'm doing. They know that I'm out sharing my story and helping other people. And I think that's one thing that God is going to bless me on, so I won't have to worry about them struggling with addiction, because they're going to be around recovery their whole life. Their lifestyle is recovery, not addiction, and I think that makes all the difference in the world. So if I can encourage anybody, if the only thing you take away from my story today is share your recovery with your children, because it can change everything in their lives. And that's what I'm here doing today, is changing the world of recovery, being a voice and an advocate for recovery, and just kind of breaking the stigmas of recovery, because I think sometimes recovery has a stigma just as thick as addiction. And recovery is just, it's a new life. That's all it is. It has nothing to do with just walking away from drugs and alcohol. It's just about creating a new life for yourself that you don't have to escape from, whatever that escape was. And the life that God has given me, if he would have shown me a vision of this back in October, what that new life was, I wouldn't have believed him, because it turned out much more beautiful than I could have ever envisioned for myself. Sometimes I want to pinch myself because I think it's going to go away. And that's still part of my childhood trauma, that I have to break away, that I'm going to lose things. But I think this time God set me on a path that's going to stick and it's going to last. And I'm trying to walk in the blessing of that and be grateful every day for it, and just keep it going. So I thank you, Ron, for inviting me to come share my story and what God's done in my life.
Thank you.